Well, I think I'm going to make a decision here. Let's go ahead and get started so we can have plenty of time for discussion if that's the direction we head in. My name is Christine. I'm just the tech support today, but I really want to take a moment today to say welcome to Marlie. And this is Marlie Wilson. She's our presenter. She is the Good Food Purchasing Project Manager at the Chicago Food Policy Action Council. And we'll be hearing from her today on the topic of food justice. So Marlie's going to have about 30 to 35 minutes, and we'll have plenty of time for questions. But at 12:45, we're cutting it because you guys need to jump into the last closing remarks session. So thank you, everybody.
Awesome. Thanks for that introduction, Christine. And if we are such a small group, I don't think we need to be as formal with the presentation, maybe as originally planned. So I'll give you just a quick preview of where we're headed, and then I'll stop sharing my screen again, and we can talk a little bit more before diving into content. Again, I'm Marlie. I'm with the Chicago Food Policy Action Council. And if you're not familiar with CFPAC, our loving acronym, we co-develop, facilitate, advocate for, and support implementation of policies to advance food justice and sovereignty across the Chicago region. And we envision a food system where all Chicagoans of all racial, class, social, and gender identities have the right to healthy and culturally appropriate food produced through community-driven, ecologically regenerative, and economically viable processes. So I will be giving a little bit of information around sort of some of the most prevalent issues in our food system to ground us in the conversation of why we've been supporting and helping to steward the Good Food Purchasing Program adoption locally across the Metro Chicago region. And I'll talk a little bit about what the Good Food Purchasing Program is and what our Metro Chicago Good Food Purchasing Initiative entails. And then I know the focus of this summit has really been about students and student food insecurity and students' roles in supporting food security, and did want to talk a little bit about what the role of students has been in the movement for food justice and sovereignty as well. And so to get us started, I'm going to stop sharing my screen in a second, and I'll type this in the chat so you have these kind of prompts to get you thinking. But I would love for everyone on the line to think about a favorite food memory. When you think back, it can be recent. If there's a really strong food memory that you have from the last month, that's fine. But if there's something from your childhood or from a certain period in your life where you had a particular meal that just was incredibly meaningful, what kind of food was it? Who were you with? And why do you think this memory stands out to you? What is conjuring it to your mind at this moment? So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and let everyone just think about that question for a minute. If you want to use pen and paper to write down your food memory, that's fine. If you'd like to just meditate on it, that's also okay. And I can only see the folks that have joined the meeting in Zoom, so I don't know if there's other folks listening in on Whova, but I would encourage folks that are on the Whova to write in the chat that food memory, who they were with, what kind of food was it, where they were, why it's important to them. And then I'm going to ask Aaron, Beth, and Christine to if you're comfortable sharing your name and I'd love to learn what your role is and why you're at this conference, and then yeah, just a little bit about that food memory that you were conjuring. So maybe I'll kick it over to Christine, because I see she's shared one in the chat already.
Sure. Yeah. So I am half Polish, and I had a grandma who did not live with us, but never really learned English very well. My dad had to translate, and pierogies are just a beloved food item. It's basically a dumpling, and she always made them. And one time in her kitchen, which was very bare in the north side of Chicago, she was trying to teach me. She really thought that I would be able to carry this on. And in watching and being with her and then eating these things, realized the secret ingredient all along that she had been putting in there that was revealed in literally no English. It's just watch, touch, no recipes, no nothing. And so yes, definitely I can remember vividly the smells, the place, and the person that I was with.
I love that, because it's like such a great example of food as a love language, and how we can communicate through food even when we can't speak to each other. It's really beautiful. And we'll let Ramona join us. Looks like they're still connecting to audio. Welcome, Ramona. We're just going around and we're sharing our name and our organization and our role, but also a favorite food memory that really sticks with us, and sharing who we were with, what food was it, and why that's an important memory. Beth or Erin, either of you have something in mind?
I can go ahead. I'm Beth Krupke. I'm from Rock Valley College in Rockford, Illinois. I'm actually an administrative assistant for TRIO, but help support the student workers that are working in the pantry that we have there on campus. So I guess my food memory is what came to mind right away was this last Easter celebration, and just having I created a taco bar, and I have adult children that came home. So one of them's married, one is not. So it was kind of nice. It was just the 5 of us, but I guess the memory part was it was just so easy for me. And I just had more time to relax and celebrate the kids being home and having conversations with them. And they loved it because they could do their own thing and make their own thing and get creative, do whatever they wanted to do. So I guess that's what popped into my mind.
Nice. Yeah, I love that family connection, just being able to be together over food, something easy. That's great. Thanks, Beth. Erin, do you have one that's come to mind? Erin's on mute. Okay. Yeah, I've definitely been thinking about just especially this holiday season, the spring holiday season, thinking about I grew up celebrating Passover, and so I definitely have a lot of strong food memories of my mother's cooking and my grandmother and my great-grandmother's cooking. And they have a matzo ball soup recipe that is very cherished, very, has been passed down from generation to generation, and very particular. You have to add carbonation to get the matzo balls fluffier. And yeah, that's like the secret ingredient there. And so, yeah, definitely thinking about those food memories as we round out, this is, I think, the last night of Passover. So, well, thank you for indulging me in that activity. Let me reshare my screen here. I wanted to couple that question with another follow-up question, which is, if my screen will move, there we go. As you think about that same food memory, some other questions that we might want to meditate on are who prepared the meal. That could be you, it could be your family member, but who prepared the ingredients that went into your meal? How was it grown? How is the land and animals and labor treated in the production of that food? And we may not know these questions, right? Or the answers to these questions, because so much of that system is not necessarily transparent. We may not know unless it's something that we picked up at the farmer's market directly from a farmer. We may not know where it was grown. And unless it has like a special label on it that maybe shares something about its production, there's a lot unknown about how people were treated, how the land was treated, whether animals were treated humanely. But what I love about working in food justice and sovereignty and working on food systems issues is how deeply, deeply personal food is to us, that we all have our unique tastes and memories around food, but also how reflective food is in the systems in which we swim, the social and political and economic and cultural systems in which we swim. And those systems dictate how and where our food is grown, who owns the land and controls production, where food is accessible and available, and how much it costs. So much of what we, how we personally interact with food is also political. And it's really the food system is so interconnected, such an intersection with so many of the critical issues that our society faces around, politically, economically, socially, culturally. So in thinking, I'll get into some of just, those connections over the course of this presentation. But in thinking about that, I think it's really critical that we ground our understanding of the modern food system in the roots of its context. Where is our food system coming from? What is its history? And unfortunately, that history is grounded in, the land on which our food is grown was taken from Indigenous peoples, and that the economy in which our country was founded was based on enslaved labor in our agricultural system. And that oppression, especially of people of color, continues to characterize our modern day food system. We're still grappling with this legacy that continues to manifest itself in our food supply chains, in our food system. So, for example, our modern day farm work is exempt from national labor laws, and much of the farm work in this country is done by people of color, and many of whom are coming from other countries on special H-2A visas, where they don't feel like they can speak out about the working conditions or wages because they may be deported or retaliated against if they do. And then the same thing goes for the entire, the entire food chain. Our food sector is some of the lowest paid work in our overall economy. The average food worker in the food chain makes $11 an hour, and that's just an average. It's low wage work, and that is also very, very different depending on race and class. So Black and Latino women only make 50 to 53 cents for every dollar that a white man makes in the food system. So it's very much a, there are continue to be these critical labor issues, especially in our food system, that are connected to racial oppression. Our food system today is also characterized by a lot of corporate consolidation. And so I like this image in that, we may go to the grocery store and feel like we have tons of options and there's tons of brands out there, but in reality, they're only owned by a handful of corporations that are making profit from these brands and controlling the industry. And that corporate consolidation has so many impacts on what's available, at what price, that you can set prices more easily if there's only a few players that are controlling the industry. And unfortunately, it's not just these consumer brands, but like only 4 firms control like 73% of the beef industry, for example. So just across the entire food supply, we see only a handful of corporations having outsized control over what is grown, how it's grown, and who profits from it. And that system of consolidation really relies ultimately on monocultured agriculture. So of just a few commodities that receive a lot of support from our federal policies, our state policies, but really encourage lots and lots of a concentrated amount of one crop to be produced on land. So here in the Midwest, corn and soy predominantly, also, wheat, and then that becomes the input for cheap animal feed and food processing ingredients. And so it really enables the brands, the corporations that control our food system to continue to turn out the products that they're producing. And unfortunately, many farmers feel like they have to produce more and more of their commodities to make money, but often at prices that don't reflect their cost of inputs and don't, they're not breaking necessarily even. So it's really not great for farmers. It's not great for the land with the synthetic and chemical fertilizers and pesticides that are required by a system of monocultured agriculture. And it's not good for our public health. So speaking of public health, what we see is because of this cheap availability of animal foodstuffs and processing ingredients, the average American is eating 1.5 times more meat than they did 50 years ago. And the average American is consuming almost 3 times as much sugar through processed food, especially, as the daily recommendation. And we know that these unfortunately have really negative repercussions on our health, especially processed meats are known to be carcinogenic, cause cancer, heart disease, diabetes. And yeah, we're, as a society, this is our food system is promoting, cheap meat and cheap processed foods to be the most available and easily accessible products to be purchased. They also taste really good. Sugar and fat are delicious. I love them. But the health impacts are not uniformly felt. Black Americans are 3 times as likely to be diagnosed with diabetes as white Americans. The health impacts are, just disproportionately felt along racial lines. And this diet also has serious impacts on our climate. By some estimates, half of all greenhouse gas emissions can be connected to the food system, whether that's through production or deforestation for agricultural production, transportation and processing, and our waste streams. And we know that animal agriculture especially has a huge impact on our carbon and water footprint. Next slide, there we go. Oh, I skipped, there we go. So what do we do? So I spent a lot of time just talking about some of the major systemic issues in our food system that are impacting our public health, the environment, dignified work and living wages, safe working conditions, and that so much of these impacts are disproportionately experienced by people of color in our food system. So CFPAC works on policy advocacy and supports the implementation of policies that advance a more just and more sustainable and fair, equitable food system. And one policy that we've promoted is the Good Food Purchasing Policy to support our public institutions with adoption of the Good Food Purchasing Program. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this particular strategy and how we see it as an opportunity for our community anchor institutions that purchase food to be investing with their food dollars in a different kind of food system, one that is regenerative and racially equitable, sustainable, and ethical. And so the Good Food Purchasing Program focuses on transforming institutional food spend towards transparency, equity, and accountability, mainly through 5 good food standards that they've set in nutrition, environmental sustainability, a valued workforce, local economies, and animal welfare. At the national level, the Good Food Purchasing Policy and the related program first developed in Los Angeles back in 2012. And then due to the successes of the policy and programmatic implementation there, a group formed, the Center for Good Food Purchasing formed to support policy adoption all across the country. And they work with their partners at the Heal Food Alliance and Food Chain Workers Alliance to build coalitions and campaigns for this policy across the country. And currently there's 60 institutions, 24 cities, 14 formal policy adoptions of the Good Food Purchasing Program, including here in the city of Chicago and Cook County. Overall, the Center for Good Food Purchasing is looking at over $1 billion of food spend enrolled in the Good Food Purchasing currently, which is pretty impressive. So how it works is a community institution shares their food purchasing data with the Center for Good Food Purchasing, who provides them with a report on what percentage of their spend is local, sustainable, healthy, fair, and humane. And then that allows the institution to understand where they're currently at so that they can make realistic and measurable change towards goals, of increasing the amount of local products that they're purchasing, of sustainable and healthy, humane, and fair food. And then they can continue to track progress through a regular assessment with the center to understand how their purchasing practices are changing over time. And a lot of this is really difficult work because the entire food system is really not designed for this kind of procurement. And so we really need to celebrate successes where we can along the way. I mentioned that this started in Los Angeles in 2012, and we've been really inspired locally about with what they've been able to do just by understanding where they're at and setting goals to make shifts. So we've seen, 20% of the overall purchases that the school district in Los Angeles is making going towards local food. They've been able to reduce their carbon and water footprint, leverage the program to support more union and living wage jobs in the supply chain. They've shifted towards healthier products and more antibiotic-free meat. And we're, in a very different context here in the upper Midwest, but also excited about the opportunities that we have to do similar work here. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what that looks like here now. As my role at the Chicago Food Policy Action Council is to help coordinate the Metro Chicago Good Food Purchasing Initiative. And this initiative is working to ensure that the places that feed our communities are purchasing food that advances a good food system. So accessible, equitable, racially just, healthy, fair, local, humane, and sustainable. And we envision a food system where the collective power of those structurally excluded from control over food production and access can imagine, build, and tend to a liberatory food shed, which is maybe a term that you may not have heard before. We're defining it as a food shed that is a regionally based ecosystem free from social and economic oppression, rooted in accountability, reconciliation, and healing. So the Good Food Purchasing Initiative of Metro Chicago is really focused on deeply implementing the Good Food Purchasing Program. So seeing all of our public departments and agencies in the city of Chicago and Cook County fully shifting their, creating these action plans to shift their food spend and aligning their other procurement laws, policies, and procedures to support that endeavor. But we also want to leverage the Good Food Purchasing Program to build more racially equitable supply chains. So supply chains that are, projects where we're providing training and resources and significant investment in funding in especially farms and food businesses that are owned by Black, Indigenous, Latinx people of color, as well as supporting food chain workers locally who are organizing for better wages and working conditions and may be able to leverage the good food purchasing policy in support of their efforts. And then we're working on building a good food culture. So where all community food access sites across the Metro Chicago area are responsive and accountable to meal program recipients, food chain workers, and food producers, and really are looking to invite more institutions to join us in the Good Food Purchasing Initiative and be part of this culture change. And we are really looking at right now, building a more clear leadership structure for how the Good Food Purchasing Initiative makes decisions, so that it's really the way in which we all that are working on these efforts are utilizing our time and resources and energy is really being guided by those most impacted by the food system. So as I mentioned earlier, the city of Chicago, as well as Chicago Public Schools and the Park District, adopted the Good Food Purchasing Program as a resolution in 2017. And Cook County government, the Board of Commissioners, adopted the same resolution in 2018. So we've been working across both the city and the county on the Good Food Purchasing Program implementation. And we're really fortunate. CivPAC works with the Chicago Department of Public Health and the Mayor's Office's City of Chicago Food Equity Council on implementing the policy with the school district, with the senior meal program, with the after school and summer meals that the park district runs, with city colleges, all these different environments that are procuring, purchasing food across the city. And then I similarly partner with the Cook County Department of Public Health on the Cook County jails, juvenile temporary detention center, and the hospitals, the Cook County Stroger and Provident hospitals, on the good food purchasing program implementation as well. And each jurisdiction runs a good food task force that guides those activities forward. And so I want to make sure that I leave enough time for questions, but just wanted to give you a sense of where this work is going. We're continuing to work with those public institutions on shifting their food spend, understanding what they're buying, and setting goals to shift that towards more local, sustainable, healthy, fair, humane products. We're doing outreach to local food producers and businesses with a focus specifically on Black and Brown owned farms and food businesses to help them understand what this market opportunity looks like, and making sure that it's a fair and equitable opportunity for them. And then we're talking with food chain workers. We plan to support more organizing around having input and feedback from meal program recipients on what's on the menu. And then are working on bringing in and inviting and welcoming other institutions across the Metro Chicago region, be they higher ed institutions, colleges and universities that purchase food, or hospitals, or other senior living facilities, other school districts, essentially any major community site where people are accessing food, where they have a significant purchasing power. We really want to welcome them to be part of this effort, and join us in shifting our local food system, and the broader food system towards these values. And we're working on legislation both at the state and federal level that will support and better align with the work that we're doing locally, because we know that's also critical. That's just a quick snapshot. So I do have a couple of other slides around the power of students specifically, and like what is their role in potentially supporting their institutions with making these shifts. But I want to pause before we get there, because I know we only have a few minutes left and I've been talking quite a bit. So I'm just going to pause screen sharing and welcome folks who joined the Zoom line late. Thank you for being here. And I'm happy to answer just any initial thoughts or questions that have come up for you as I've been going through this presentation. And it's totally okay if right now there aren't any, but I know a lot of the content from the rest of the summit has really been focused on food insecurity within higher ed. And, you know, I think it's just critical to connect what we're doing with the Good Food Purchasing Initiative to that particular issue. Like, we're really trying to think about how can our institutions really be proactively addressing the root causes of the social determinants of health, as we say in the public health world. Like, why are people hungry? Why is there economic instability that leads to hunger? How can we have our institutions investing in a more vibrant food economy that can support more ownership and employment opportunity, like good employment opportunities, right, in community? How can we be building out access on college campuses, for example, but also through the school cafeteria and through senior meals that provide higher quality foods through those emergency and public meal programs. So I'm I'm very grateful for the opportunity to connect this imperative for institutions to be shifting their food spend to this issue of food insecurity in general, and especially on college campuses and how they're, really connected.
Marlie, can I ask a question? Because we often hear from students, and I'm a co-advisor for a student organization, Phi Theta Kappa, and students are so impassioned and they want to make a difference and they want to vote with their dollars. And so, many times their response will be, well, I'm just going to eat local, or I'm going to be vegan, or, they'll avoid certain food sets. But then there are the rare students that come to us and they say, I want to be the next Marlie. And so what would you tell students that watch this recording about how they can best prepare themselves to get in this lane, to become the next person that's advocating for the mission of this project? And what kind of skill sets? What should we tell students if they want to do more than just vote with their dollars? What should we be telling them to prepare and get involved with now?
Christine, what a great setup. It's as if we
good.
really didn't plan this, but I actually will share the rest of the final slides of my presentation, because I wanted to talk about the power of students through my own story of being a student that really got engaged in this work in college. And I started with just growing food myself and learning how to garden and growing food in community gardens and with other students to feed my community and myself. And I know that has already been touched on, and there's been a lot of discussion throughout the summit today about community gardens as a food access project. But I absolutely this is how I fell in love with thinking about food systems, was through growing my own food. I also got involved with an organization at the national level called CoFed in building out a student food cooperative on my campus. So we were catering events, as this photo shows, where we would be providing locally sourced, healthy products for different campus meetings. And we actually created a pretty thriving business that was operating on our campus, and kind of, we had this dream of having our own space, our own kind of brick and mortar location on campus, but we ultimately just operated as a kind of catering company. But it was a really awesome way to not only empower ourselves, but educate others on campus about food and do things differently than maybe a typical catering company would. The other thing that I got involved with was a group called the Student Farm Worker Association, and they really leverage student power to support farm workers who, as I shared earlier in the presentation, often don't feel like they have a voice to make change in how much they're being paid or how they're being treated on the farm. And so at the time of my involvement in the Student Farm Worker Association, we were working on this penny more per pound campaign for tomatoes for the Coalition of Immokalee Workers in Florida. That was ultimately a successful campaign with student pressure on some of the major purchasers of those tomatoes. We were able to change the amount that farm workers were receiving for their labor. And then another organization that I had gotten involved with as a college student was a group called Real Food Generation that specifically looks at food on college campuses and how it could support the values that we're working on in the Good Food Purchasing Initiative. And so I'd be happy to connect students that are interested in joining the Real Food Generation's campaigns to the organizers in the Midwest. It's linking to a YouTube video, which I don't know what that would be. So I'm going to go back. I think that's, oh, and then, yes, I was going to also mention, so after college, I applied for a service membership called Food Corps. It's connected to AmeriCorps, and had the opportunity to teach students, youth, about garden and food education in actually a really awesome greenhouse space where we could grow year round with the kids, which was perfect. But there's a lot you can do even just during the school year to educate them about pollinators and the seasons and our water system and how seeds grow. And it's an incredible educational tool to work in the garden with kids. So that was, I think, a really important professional development opportunity for me to learn by doing, and also learn more about how school food operates and how school food service providers procure food, and whether there are opportunities within that to support more local producers in the school cafeteria. All right, so hopefully, Christine, that helps answer your question a little bit about, students, I think, they have so many opportunities available to them to be working on creative strategies to address food justice and sovereignty with the leverage that they have as students. And so I hope that for folks that get to watch this presentation, they feel inspired or excited about something that they might be able to do on their campus. And if they need help or advice, I'd be happy to connect with them.
Thank you. And that does answer my question. Yeah, exactly what I was looking for. And once again, it's another really good example of you just need to show up. You need to get involved, and it leads to things. And hands-on is really a great way of learning as well. So how about we give a round of applause to Marlie for sharing and preparing for today's session. Thank you, Marlie, very much for your time today. So it is 12:45-ish, and we're going to head back into Hoover to access our final session of the day. And we're going to hear some closing remarks, and we're going to do some reflection on the day's events and wrap it all up. So and then start our weekends, right? So thank you, everybody.
I just dropped my information in the chat. I'll do the same on Hoover. Thanks, everybody. I really appreciate you spending the hour with me.
Thanks, Marlie. Bye-bye.